Evening all on Play Chess and also streaming to YouTube. Okay, hi all. So I thought we could carry on from last week. The next match after Fischer demolished Mark Taimanov 6-0 was 2 weeks later against Bent Larsen. So Bent Larsen was widely considered one of the strongest players in the West, and one of the few Western players which the USSR players feared. He came second, for example, in the 1970 Palma de Mallorca to Fischer, Bent Larsen. He played board 1 in the Rest of the World match, USSR versus Rest of the World match, ahead of Fischer in 1970. So, very talented grandmaster, Bent Larsen. Let's see what happened in game 1 of the Candidates Semifinal. So, in game 1, Fischer kicked off with e4. So, Bent Larsen actually reacted with the French defence. Maybe statistically he'd looked at Fischer's games, and sometimes Fischer didn't do so well against the French defence. Fischer played d4, d5, and plays knight c3, which is the Winawer variation, which allows this pin, bishop b4. The Tarrasch, I think, has the advantage that, well, the pin you can play c3, so it's quite committal, the Winawer. But it was in Fischer's repertoire to play this against the French. So bishop b4, e5, and often players with black just play c5 here. But Bent Larsen played knight e7, which is another alternative to the immediate c5, just playing knight e7. Very popular alternative to immediate c5. Nevertheless, white can still play a3 here, which he does. Black takes, and now transposing back c5. And queen g4 here is still a popular move, just hitting g7. Fischer didn't play that though. Another one is knight f3, just knight f3. This is one of Fischer's pet systems now, we see. The move a4. White has the bishop pair clearly, and black has potential dark square weaknesses. This bishop aims to go onto this diagonal, so those dark squares are more sensitive than usual. There's no dark square bishop counterpart for black here. It's a very, very logical plan, and in fact I myself have used this plan quite a lot looking at Fischer's games. It seems just a very, very logical idea, this a4, for the bishop to come to this diagonal. Knight bc6. And the bishop doesn't have to commit yet. Knight f3, bishop d7. We see bishop d3 here. Let's add a Kibitzer as well, actually. I think castling on the king side is often quite risky in this kind of variation. I think there might actually be a Greek gift on. If castling, then there's a Greek gift with bishop takes that works here. So that's kind of out of the question. This is too dangerous for black's king in this particular position. For example, like this, queen d3, knight f5. White's going to be doing very, very well here. Yeah, so that's to be avoided. Black can't really castle king side here. That's not his intention. He plays actually queen c7 here, which is the main move, queen c7. It gives black the option of castling queen side. White castles. And now, yes, the most popular move is actually to close up the queen side with c4. In one sense, it's releasing the tension here to do this. Sometimes it's to be avoided. But it's the most popular move in this particular position, to release that tension, to force the bishop back. And for black now to hit the head of the pawn chain with f6. There's 17 games in live book from this position. So a very theoretical debate really in the Winawer. Rook e1. White wants to open up lines here. He's got the bishop pair. Black would be very unwise, I think, to take e5 immediately. He plays knight g6, putting more pressure on e5. Let's just have a quick look at this position. No, actually, I think f takes is actually playable here. And black, for example, could, it seems, with the bishop not on d3, black could contemplate even castling kingside. It is an option to do this, it seems. But we see knight g6. And now white just plays bishop a3, so the bishop is now threatening bishop d6, which is really exploiting those dark squares. But what about the e5 pawn? Well, okay, f takes e5 is played. D takes. Now if black's prevented, of course, from castling kingside with that bishop. And if he castles queenside again, we have this issue of bishop d6, which is more than unpleasant. This is probably losing for black. This is not good, this position here, for black to tolerate this. So after bishop a3, it's rather committal for black to do something about bishop d6. So he takes out the e5 pawn, d takes, and now knight c takes e5. So it's a pawn sacrifice. How dangerous is it for black? Let's see, knight takes e5 is played, knight takes. Now without the knight on c6, white can actually play this central move now, queen d4. So hitting the knight, threatening maybe just to move the bishop back to put pressure on the e file, and then if the knight moves, g7 is a problem. So it's a pretty tricky position already for black here. He's under pressure. Also, actually, even bishop h5 check could be quite dangerous as well. So if it forces knight g6, this is a dangerous position for black. Okay, so Bent Larsen chooses one of the better moves, knight g6 now. So he's clearly, what's up with taking the g7 pawn, you might ask. Let's have a quick look. In the game, bishop h5 was played, which pins the knight. If Fischer had played queen takes g7, then black has time to castle queenside, and maybe there's some prospects here of using that g file later against the white king. So I don't think that's the best pawn ever to take, that g pawn, because the road is cleared towards white's king. So instead, white is trying to use the grip on the dark squares he's created. He plays actually bishop h5, pinning the knight. And here, okay, let's have a look at this position. If black considered castling queenside, which he didn't, black actually chose king f7. But let's have a quick look at this position. King f7 was chosen. Maybe, you know, casting queenside is one of the better moves. Some obvious possibilities, like why is the a7, if the a7 pawn hangs like that, then this position might not be too bad for black. If the queens come off here, this isn't apparently, you know, absolutely decisive or anything, but white's a bit better. It's got better prospects. Maybe there's some attack brewing, but it seems as though this might be defensible in theory on brief analysis here. So, but yeah, so if casting queenside, it does seem as though that's a viable possibility that could have been considered to give up the a7 pawn. But maybe even better than just taking on a7 could be a5. and this makes it more dangerous to take on a7. And also it is quite a dangerous position generally. If king b8, then this, and it is looking really dangerous now, this position. So I think probably a5 might have dissuaded, instead of just queen takes a7, a5 here. It's difficult for black. This position, we're threatening now bishop b6. If here, then maybe white can switch over to this side. It's very interesting that the pressure on both sides of the board, which the queen is exerting here on d4. So it seems as though there's a very interesting compensation going on with this fantastically central queen. So Larsen's decision to play king f7 here. Another possibility is also a6 maybe, but yeah, he played king f7. And it seems, yeah, this might not have been actually technically one of the better moves, at least from an engine perspective. Actually, it seems there's an evaluation shift technically from about +1 to white to nearly, like, after king f7, nearly +3. We're talking nearly +3. So is it a mistake, king f7? The thing with it is, it seems to allow white a very aggressive and fairly quick undermining of this pawn chain with f4, f5, with this knight pinned and this queen central like that, and this is a checking diagonal. This f4, f5 seems extremely dangerous here to play f4. So these other considerations here, I mean, really need to be taken quite seriously. Castling queenside or a6. I mean, this sort of thing, you know, may have been a lesser evil in the circumstances. But anyway, let's go with the game continuation. So king f7, f4. Larsen had cited, he thought that it was quite hot when the match was played. It didn't really suit him. He didn't feel he was playing optimally. But I think the first two games were seen by many as very high quality anyway. But yeah, it seems as though black is in difficulties in this particular position, with f5 coming up as a major issue. How does black actually react to this? If he moves like his king, say he moves his king here, then f5 still. I mean, this just shows how dangerous it is. It can all crash through like this. It's actually a false mate here. It's just a disaster. So black's got to be really careful. He plays rook he8. This might be one of the better defensive moves in the circumstances. So now this f5 happens anyway, so hitting this pawn chain really quite hard. E takes f5. Queen takes d5. Yes, black's king safety does seem extremely suspect here. In fact, already combinations are apparent in this position. Black played king f6. It's a pretty bad position with the bishop and queen like this. If bishop e6, it seems white can actually do real damage in this position, with rook takes e6, rook takes, queen takes f5. Now, if here rook f6, queen d5 check, rook e6, there aren't too many choices, and then now rook f1 check, and that rook's dropping off, so that would be end of game with the rook dropping off. So yeah, something's really gone wrong here for black to be in this state where he's playing king f6 on move 20. He's been a bit, I would say, smashed already. To have this position, to have to play king f6 here at move 20. Okay, so now Fischer actually played maybe a slight inaccuracy here. He played bishop f3. There's actually an even stronger move technically. I wonder if you can spot it. What would you play in this position? Has anyone got any idea about this position? Bishop f3 was played. What would you consider to be quite strong here? If I give you 20 seconds, white's play here at move 20. Any ideas? I mean, I think this position is so shocking, actually. I'd like to revisit the opening. Pardon me. I'd like to revisit the opening because it seems Fischer's system against the French has worked like a treat here. He's just sacrificed the central pawn and really compromised Black's king safety. And his bishops seem to be running rampant, especially this like dark square bishop. Okay, here it seems a crushing move would have been bishop d6. If queen c6, queen d4 check. Here, this just looks terminal. Bishop f3 now, we've got h4 in the cards, and queen takes g7 to follow. For example, okay, that would pin, but bishop c5, h4 check, check. It's pretty bad. Black's all over the place with his king on h6. He's losing material. So Fischer missed the knockout blow, it seems, in this position by playing bishop f3. It seems, I mean, this is a strong move as well, bishop f3. Yeah, it seems a really, really strong position though, but bishop d6 seems to be the most incisive. So with this idea of the check, forcing, if the king goes here, bishop f3, and we're going to have bishop d5. It's horrible. Bishop d5. This rook takes e6 is really quite crushing in this position. Knight f8, we can just knock out the defense of the pin and win material. It's a very crushing position, basically, after bishop d6. But yeah, Fischer played this bishop f3. And it does allow this move Nxe5 now, where white's advantage technically is being minimized with after knight e5. One of the great points about if he had played bishop d6, this wouldn't have existed. Now if he plays bishop d6 now, of course, there's knight takes f3 check, which makes a big difference to the position, knocking out white's bishop pair. And then actually black might actually be okay here in this position. So it's a huge difference to bishop pair or not. Generally, the bishop pair, they compensate for each other's weaknesses very, very well. So the attacking player wants to keep hold of the bishop pair. And if knight e5 isn't interfering with things, it has to be stopped. One of the key points about bishop d6, gaining more control over the center. But anyway, so Fischer's allowed this knight e5, and it seems as though black's given a bit of breath of fresh air here. Is the advantage minimized now? Well, there's still this nasty pin, queen d4. With white threatening bishop d6, that has to be parried. The king wriggles out before bishop d6 is happening, with basically one of the only moves now to keep hold of position. King g6. So he goes here. If the king goes to f7, then there's, in this position, well, it's similar to the game actually. So I'm going to show you the game. It's a little bit less devastating than the game. the tactic of the game position, what would you play in this position, which is interesting but not as crushing as if the king had gone to f7. What would you play here? It gets extremely tactical. Alright, now actually Game Per Frame has asked on stream, okay, I'm going to have to cover king f7 first. Let's look at king f7 before we get into the game continuation. If king f7 here, rook takes e5. The point is, if queen takes, and we take here, and then we've just got a fantastic position here. This is clearly much better for white. And the other point here on king f7, after rook takes e5, rook takes e5, is we now have bishop d6. So if queen b6, pinning the queen, bishop takes e5, and again, white's just material up. So king f7 is clearly inferior to what was played. King g6 is basically the only move to stay on the board. But Fischer plays this rook takes e5 even in this position now, but it's a bit less effective. If rook takes e5, again we have this bishop d6. And white's clearly winning there, but black does have the option of queen takes e5, which was played. I hope the board's still okay. So I hope the board's still okay and still following this. So queen takes e5. Okay, white's winning that bishop there, and it seems a good deal for a moment. Queen takes d7. But now comes a kind of counter-attack. Okay, so it's a rook against two bishops, but there's a kind of counter-attack after rook ad8. And actually, the position's on a knife edge now. It needlessly, from the early position, it seems a bit on a knife edge. White is forced into queen takes b7. I mean, nothing else will do. Queen takes b7. We have queen e3 check. And it's dangerous. If white plays now king h1, then he's going to be back row mated with queen e1 check. He's back row mated here. So he has to put his king on f1 now and allow this seemingly really dangerous rook d2, rook on the 7th, threatening mate. So Fischer has to play precisely now to avoid being mated. He plays check. It's virtually the only move here. Rook e6 is played. If king g5, this is much better for white after bishop c5. That stops the mate and puts black under great pressure. So rook e6, and Fischer relies on bishop c5 here to stop the mate. And we have something very, very interesting now happening. We have rook f2 check from Bent Larsen after king g2. An imbalance of material is created now because black finds a way to get white's queen here by avoiding the attack on his own queen. He plays actually the move rook takes g2, double check. So is Fischer in trouble? Because with this double check, there aren't too many good choices here. He has to really take this now with his king. If he plays king h1, then this is better for black. Rook takes h2, queen d2 check, and then taking here, taking. This is actually a major improvement over the game. We've got this imbalance of the queen versus rook and two bishops, but the game version is much better version for white to just take the rook immediately. So we have queen d2 check, getting out of the glare of the bishop, and he's going to be winning the queen, but this is a much better version after king h1, taking the queen off, bishop takes c6. Yes, it's important to have the h2 pawn shielding the king here. Okay, now this is a really interesting position where black played actually queen takes c3. So can the rook and two bishops coordinate against the queen? We see first rook g1 check, so with tempo. And now white gets a very important pawn here. Taking off that a7 pawn means this pawn is now a very dangerous passed pawn. This bishop is instrumental in stopping major checks on the diagonal, of course. Whoops. On this diagonal, yeah, it's safe, relatively safe for the white's king. He's just got to somehow herd this a pawn up now. Possibly queen takes c2. It's been recommended here as technically equal. I'm not so sure about this position. Looks a bit dangerous for black, but maybe with very accurate play, I don't know. Because here now, rook a1, it's just a tricky position with this a pawn. If it can be consolidated, this position with the bishops controlling these two key diagonals, then this a pawn is just going up here. If we try c3, a6, c2, a7, we're going to be winning for white. So it's a very, very difficult position. Let's just go back. So here, black, he didn't take on c2. He played g5. Yeah, the pawn's only 1, 2, 3, 4. So the bishop gets out of the way with bishop b6. So it's going to drag that pawn up. Queen takes c2 is played now. a5. Queen b2 trying to delay things. Bishop gets out of the way though with check. King e6, and now the pawn relentlessly marches forward with a6. So the queen is actually in this particular position no match for these pieces, it seems. The queen gets behind the pawn. Bishop b7. And now white is threatening just simply bishop b6 to herd the pawn, with the two bishops herding that pawn to a8. Queen c5 trying to interfere. So white needs to get in bishop b6. He plays actually rook b1. So again, bishop b6 is now on the cards with a7 to follow. This is getting critical now. Black tries c3. It's too late with this c pawn. Bishop b6 now. It's far too late. Black resigned here on move 41. If, for example, queen e5, a7, c2, white can play rook g1 and say this, queen, queen. The black king is just going to get crushed here. It's no good, this position. The king's too unsafe to survive this. And in fact, white could even just take the queen at some point and play bishop g1. Just two bishops up. So yeah, and move 41, yeah, it was resigned around here. I think after bishop b6. Okay, so it is quite interesting. It's not as accurate as you might have imagined. You know, Fischer seemed to miss a knockout blow there, but then later won anyway. What I find slightly intriguing, is the opening. I just want to step you through that again with Livebook to see what happened there, because surely that's not theory for black to be in such trouble. This was a popular sequence, very popular sequence. We're about nearly 400 games here so far. Often Queen A5 is played in this particular position, but Larsen chose the much little rarer Bishop D7, and yeah, it's slightly rarer territory, but black is often playing F6, and white is usually playing Rook E1, and black is usually playing Knight G6. Well, there's 5 games here, so we've kind of gone off much of the beaten territory. There's a game with castling queenside, but again, white does seem to be having a great time here after Bishop D6. So I think just from a theoretical angle, in playing this line, it's slightly risky. I think probably the safest departure from it would have been, it seems a lot of people are playing Queen A5 here. Just for those theoretically interested. So I suppose asking about C3, if say Bishop D2, then casting here, and if Bishop D3, H6, this position might be quite playable. But what happened in the game, it just seems a bit of a nightmare to me, at least, that white had such a dangerous initiative created from black, basically like opening up the position with F6 for the bishop pair to run riot here, especially like the dark square bishop. So taking this pawn, for me, this position already at move 14 after knight c takes e5 looks to be a fairly big advantage for white, even though white's a pawn down. I don't know how many of you agree with that. Do you think this is also, do you think, if I let you have a look at this for a moment, do you think this is already a big advantage here after knight c takes e5? Because for me, I think it is. We've got this very dangerous bishop pair. Does anyone disagree with that? I think this use of the d4 square is particularly dangerous. Here, queen d4, black was already in severe trouble. I think if he played, say, knight c6, then actually check here. There's no g6 because we're looking at the rook. This is just diabolical. So, yeah, knight g6. If knight f7, again, bishop h5, it's just horrible. Black's prevented from castling this way and this way. So if knight g6 is virtually forced, then yeah, this is just not great for black. So yeah, as I say, castling queenside, it's already a pretty dangerous position. So here after f4, f5, it seems as though, yeah, there's almost like a knockout blow here with bishop d6, which has been well discussed for kibitzing of this game on the internet. Bishop d6 seems to be a critical move, which really, as we saw, queen c6 here, check. This is just unbelievably bad for black. But even in the game continuation, it's amazing that this happened. This game continuation with, it seems for a moment, you know, black was getting very dangerous coordination of his pieces against the king here. So even though white's winning 2 pieces for the rook, we have this very dangerous looking coordination. But now through very accurate play, white's getting 3 pieces for the queen, and it turns out that the a pawn is decisive. One thing, okay, another slight question. I don't think there was any time white with the check is forcing the win of the a pawn, and the advantage is just growing here relentlessly, it seems. I think it may be technically a very bad position for black already because of that a pawn. Once the pieces start coordinating, that's it here. Alright, let's look at game 2 of the match. So in game 2, okay, so Bent Larsen playing white against Fischer. Let's flip the board. He plays the English opening c4, and we have c5 from Fischer, symmetrical English opening, knight f3. Now black doesn't continue with symmetrical knight f6, he actually plays g6. And Bent Larsen plays now the most popular move, d4. And often players with black actually play bishop g7 here. Fischer took on d4. Knight takes d4. Knight c6. e4. So white has set up that dreaded kind of Maroczy bind here against the d5 square. Knight f6. Knight c3. d6. Bishop e2. And players with black usually do statistic what Fischer plays in this position. He doesn't play bishop g7. The most popular move is actually to take on d4 immediately to bring the queen to d4 here, and now play bishop g7. Players with white often play bishop e3 here. This is another major alternative that was played. Bishop g5. And black often just castles now. That's the most usual move, just the castle. We're talking nearly like 800 games in live book, just castling here. It's a fairly standard typical position. Interestingly, Fischer chose to kick the bishop, which is quite rare actually. It's only like 22 games instead of 800. Just kicking that bishop. Slight little nuance here. Bishop goes to e3, and now black castled. So he set up potentially this other little target, this h6 pawn, which white immediately sets his sights on with queen d2. So what's the idea here? King h7. White castles. It's still it's okay for black. It's not, black's not on the critical list because he's got this pawn on h6 and the king here. It seems a pleasant enough bind. And okay, let's see. I mean, I think many of us have had to play this position with black ourselves in various games. It's quite popular to set up the Maroczy bind. So I personally found it quite fascinating. What's the answer here for black from Fischer? What does he do? What active plan is available for black? You know, we've seen some very interesting plans for black in these types of positions from Magnus Carlsen's, often pushing his a pawn to a3 in some games as a plan at some point. What is Fischer's plan? Well, he plays actually bishop e6. So it looks, the first obvious target is the c4 pawn, just to put some pressure on the c pawn, and maybe try and encourage the weakening of the dark squares a bit more for this g7 bishop. If white can be encouraged to play b3 at some point, that does seem a very logical idea. And I think this next move from white, it's rather committal. I think a good test of the Maroczy bind here would be just the safe move to see what Fischer would be doing, just to play something like f3 or rook ac1. But this is a very aggressive try from white. He plays actually f4. He clearly wants to maybe punish black for his h6, and f5 looks like a very dangerous idea, gaining space, gaining a tempo on this bishop. The only slight downside of this f4 f5 plan, it will weaken this e5 square once it's played. We see rook c8, so for the moment f5 is ruled out because black could just take on c4. There's nothing much else happening of major significance after that, so white has to do something about the c4 pawn. He protects it. And here now we see a very, very sharp move in the circumstance, with the slight weakening of the light squares, and in particular the weakness of the last move is the c3 knight. It's slightly looser than before, even though black seems to be, should he be worried about this f5? He plays actually what seems to be a very tactical move, which seems to tap into the slight weakness of the last move, queen a5, looking at the knight. Now let's see what happens here. Well, really, white, it seems, might have f5 still as a playable move. He didn't play it. It's actually the engine's top choice anyway to play f5. You actually maybe try to repel the queen by playing a3 here. It's an interesting move, a3. f5, it does seem playable. Now, sorry, there's a comment question here from Muck Van Veen. Is the diagonal e6 c4 the reason for the migration of the king to h7, therefore h6 to kick the bishop? I don't know, it seems like Fischer's played this slightly unusually with this h6 and king h7 plan. I mean, it does seem as though f5 in this position offers white an advantage in theory. If the bishop does have to go back, I don't think there's any tactical move available for black here. If the bishop has to go back, then this could have been a pleasant position. It seems a pleasant enough position here off the rook ad1. Maybe bishop c6, trying to target this one though, and possibly you know, there's enough play for black. Okay, but yeah, in the game we see this a3. And white still got this f5, it seems, on the cards. We see a6 from Fischer, which again, it seems a kind of stereotypical move that you want to attack this pawn chain over here with a move like b5 to really hit this c4 hard. The pawn chain has been slightly loosened with a3 as well. That b5 will be a bit more effective than before a3 was played. But here, white now plays f5. The bishop goes back, and one of the points of a3 to drive the queen now, to kick the queen away, was played by playing b4. Unfortunately, yeah, what I find slightly mysterious about this game, and I've been for it a few times actually, what I do find slightly mysterious, it seems a bit too convenient here that white has weakened the e5 square and given the queen a nice parking slot on e5 for b4, which Fischer just uses. Basically, he just uses this parking slot on e5. After b4, he just plays queen e5. And is this annoying? How annoying is this, basically? Black seems to be threatening immediate knight takes e4, or just to put pressure with maybe even g takes and then knight g4. There's a lot of tactics opening up, like on this diagonal, or bishop c6. It seems fairly annoying, but actually technically it seems as though white should be okay here, even with this queen e5. If white plays a move like rook ad1, he actually played a similar looking move, rook e1, but this might be slightly inferior. There's specific technical reasons here why this might be slightly inferior. Okay, now we'll look at the game continuation first. Rook e1 was played here. The first point to note, what about this e pawn? If black takes the e pawn, knight takes e4, queen takes, white has rook f4, queen goes here, and now white gets a violent attack with rook h4. And actually black may be completely busted here. This is one of the points, one of the subtle points, maybe a subtle trap, you could argue, is being laid for Fischer with rook at e1 to take on e4. If that's really the case, this important tempo gain for attacking h6 is pretty critical. If anyone doesn't believe that, we can have a quick look at that. But Fischer didn't take here. Maybe he sensed that danger, but he's still using his queen's parking slot. He plays bishop c6 to put more pressure on e4, and he's putting the question for white: is it worth it to allow this queen to e5? Let's have a quick look at this again. Knight takes e4, knight takes. We have rook f4, queen say goes here, rook h4. It looks terminal. If h5, bishop takes h5, and you know this attack looks like a Larsen crushing attack. Bishop h6. And then we've got things like queen g5. It seems a very, very nice idea. I don't think black can really defend this. He hasn't got the defensive resources here available to defend this. We can even throw in this if here and then carry on the attack. It's pretty dangerous. Okay, so Fischer wisely, it seems as though, he wisely avoids taking on e4. He plays bishop c6. But we've really got out of this Moxie bind. It's a tactical slugfest behind the scenes now of this game. But with black, if we remember in the previous match against time, remember the two bishops striking across the centre? It seems Fischer's doing the same thing. He's managing to get his bishops cross-firing across the centre here, and they seem very, very logically placed. Is the queen really exploitable on e5? I mean, that's one big question. White does attack the queen now with bishop f4. But it allows Fischer to play knight takes e4. We have knight takes e4, queen takes e4. A very dangerous looking forcing sequence now. Bishop d3. We have check. King h1. And now white is threatening rook takes e7. And I think there's a limited ways of protecting this e7 pawn here. Rook ce8 was played. I don't know how we can actually defend this pawn. If we offer it as a sacrifice or something, f takes. This is not particularly a pleasant position for king safety. There's too much scrutiny on the king side, so it's just humbly protected for a moment. Bishop e3 is played now. And it seems a very, very precise move in this particular position is played from Fischer, seemingly as though, well, other things just fell. A lot of things just fell. Let's see how they would fall. Let's rule out queen f6. Queen c3 was played, but let's rule out queen f6. We just lose the queen. Yeah, we're just losing the queen there. But what about, say, queen h4? Whoops, queen h4. We'll look at queen g4 as well. Rook f4 is nasty. If here, this is very dangerous now for black. Say b5. If the bishop moves back, queen f2, and we've got rook h4 again, we're targeting h6, and it's just very, very dangerous. So Fischer avoids that in this position, and let's have a quick look at Queen G4. Again, Rook F4 runs into Rook F4. If here, using the pin, B5 is good, but also maybe even King G1. And again, Queen F2, and we're going to be using this idea of Rook H4. So Fischer's move is very accurate. It emphasizes how accurate this move is. Queen C3. If he plays Queen B2, that's another one to look at. Then here, white gains an advantage with F takes. Takes. Bishop takes G6. And that's really dangerous. If King takes, Queen D3 is a mate in 7. So the Queen, yeah, this can't be allowed, this sort of thing. So Queen C3 is virtually the only move to start on the board here. Queen C3 as played, just by elimination. Queen C3 is the only move. There's all sorts of very grave dangers, but it allows white to regain his lost pawn here with a tactical move. Can you see what white plays to regain the pawn in this position? So white's plan regain the pawn. I'll just ask that as a question. How would you regain your pawn? Does anyone see how? As played in the game. Any ideas? It's probably the best move in 3, but okay, the move play was bishop takes h6. It regains the pawn because if takes, we take the queen. Someone mentioned, by the way, just have a quick look at f6. We just take on d2 here. We're threatening mate on g2. So that's not working, f6 or anything. But if bishop takes h6, regains the pawn. The problem is, from a strategic perspective now, black seems to have some more central pawns than white. Even though there seems to be some lurking king safety issues, but now black also makes use of that e5 square with bishop e5. So his bishops are nicely pointing down these two diagonals. So black seems to have equalised at least throughout all of this, and he hasn't suffered the wrath of the Moxie bind or whatever. He's got a nice position to work with here at move 25. White plays bishop f4. Okay, so it's still pretty tricky. Bishop takes f4, some simplification. Now taking out a more central pawn with this seems to expose his king for a moment. But look at these central pawns here. The king steps out of the firing line with king g7. And for a moment you might think, well actually this is if white can potentially force a draw here. It seems the king is a bit too exposed. It seems technically if white wanted to draw this, he's very close to getting some sort of perpetual check. He plays rook g5 check. Fischer plays king h6. If white wanted to draw, it seems as though this should be equal rook g4. And there's actually, you know, this idea of just mating the king with rook e3 and rook h3. If we have rook g8 here, check. This could be perpetual check or something. Or close to it. Rook h7. Check. This is just a fantasy variation, but we could end up in perpetual check land potentially. But anyway, it's in this particular position the rook didn't go back to g4, Bent Larsen protected the rook with h4. That seems to have some of its own unique points to it to protect the rook here. For a start, these rooks are still like passive for a moment. If rook g8, we just take on. We might be at some point. Well, for the moment, yeah, g2 is stopping rook g8, but b5 to take the bishop off the diagonal is dangerous for black. This is a dangerous position for black, because then rook takes g8. Once the bishop's off the diagonal, we could play rook takes g8 and rook takes e7. So yeah, Fischer's under slight pressure here with this move h4, but he plays now e6. So he's taking care of his e7 pawn, and if he's going to play f5, he's going to restrict the scope of that bishop soon. So rook f1, and now black does seem to be starting to have a comfortable looking position after f5. These pawns look very nice to have, these central pawns. Rook e1, and we see rook f7 now. So carefully maybe arranging rook g7 with this pawn protected by this rook. And white is starting to be slightly outplayed now. White plays b5. We have a takes, c takes, but that's another pawn away from the center, potentially. Bishop d7 was played here. Interestingly, this looks like a natural move, bishop d5, but apparently it seems bishop f5, yeah, because we've got this pin on this here. So he doesn't want to run into that, so the bishop just goes here, keeping hold of e8. Still, white should be okay, it seems. g4. And it's dangerous, this position, after g4. As an example, if takes, then here, bishop g6. Ouch. Okay, so Fischer plays now rook a8. White plays g takes after e takes. White should be fine here with rook eg1, just doubling here. And there's actually, concrete ideas like bishop e2 and rook h5. It should be fine for white, this position, just playing rook eg1. And it's actually a little bit dangerous. But slight slip up perhaps. Instead of rook eg1, it does seem quite logical. We see the move bishop c4. Blunder, I would say. It's a relative blunder at this level of chess. Bishop c4. There's a very resourceful move for black now to counter attacking the rook here. It seems very lucrative to try and force infiltration to the 7th rank. If rook g7, then that's end of game. We just take here and rook e7, winning the bishop. So it seems very lucrative, but Fischer seems to have this covered with a fantastically resourceful move. If the rook goes back, then again rook e7 seems very unpleasant. But Fischer's got something against this bishop c4, which maybe was unexpected. It's a fantastic move in the circumstance at move 37. So fantastic 37th move. So black to play, and it actually gives black the advantage. So black to play here, what would you play as black in this position? Korchnoi, by the way, lost to Petrosian in so never met Fischer. Fischer met Petrosian in the final of the candidates. If Korchnoi had beaten Petrosian, Fischer would have obviously met Korchnoi in the final of the candidates of 1971. So that's why Fischer and Korchnoi didn't meet, by the way. Someone asked about that. So very, very strong move here, black to play. Yeah, it shows Fischers can see the amazing forcing moves of the position, which often, yeah. I think there's an apt description I read of Fischer being devilishly resourceful. I think the Russians said that of Fischer when he was young, much younger. Devilishly resourceful. And here, rook a4. Ouch. Because the point is, if bishop takes f7, we take on h4 check, and the king's going to be munching the rook with advantage. This position with advantage. So yeah, it's a painful move to see. Rook a4. White plays rook c1. But now, yeah, Rome is crumbling here, because what does black play now? Black to play again. Black to play here. What would you play in this position? After rook c1. So he's making use of a slightly loose rook on g5. It's only protected by the pawn. If only this pawn wasn't there protecting the rook. You could look at it as a kind of loose piece related tactical concept. Or so how do you force this situation? Yeah. This is the computer move as well. Bishop takes b5. Yeah, Fischer's playing like a computer. It's like playing Ribker or something. Stockfish. Bishop takes b5. White's getting munched here. Ouch. So yeah, White's material down now. He takes on f7. So we have this continuation. Rook takes h4. He's 2 pawns down. Oh dear. Can he really survive this 2 pawns down? It's pretty unlikely against Fischer, isn't it? Bishop a6. And this other pawn, his last remaining pawn, is attacked. And swapped for the d6 one. So Fischer's got 2 distant passed pawns here to work with. He drives the king back to an awkward passive first rank and uses his king very aggressively. King f4. Rook b2. Okay, holds everything together. He can be patient here, 2 pawns up, stopping any rook b6 from white. Brings this pawn off the glare of the bishop onto a dark square, slightly improving the position. Now slightly improves the bishop. Bishop e2, bishop g4, bishop f3, slightly improving his position. And now the bishop occupies a very nice central square, e4. So this bishop is getting more and more passive. Bishop a6. And now this f pawn is very dangerous, but there's also another factor here coming into play. After king e3, this is starting to be really dangerous, this sort of stuff, rook g2 and rook a2 and stuff. It's pretty lost actually here after king e3, because there's also f4 and this stuff to factor in as well. Rook c8, check. Now after king h2, it's actually a forced mate in 4, with the first move being king f4. Black is threatening rook h1 here, and white resigned. There seems to be no way out of the forced mate in this position. Yeah, so it's not even about the pawns at all. The pawns just stood still. It's just about the king being really aggressive in the final position. It's just like weaving a mating net around the white king. Yeah, so it was a very interesting tactical game behind the scenes. The Maroczy bind, it seems, you know, Bent Larsen understandably, maybe when he saw this kind of slight innovation, you know, with H6, it seems White reacted kind of appropriately in many respects to try and smash it open with F4, F5 as a plan, in principle. Because remember, when we've got F4, F5, we've also got things like this to come and gang up on H6. It seems, in some ways, very, very logical approach against Black's position. But what Fischer did was play extremely accurately here to get this. Queen c3 was holding on and getting, you know, returning the pawn, but having slightly more central pawns. I think White could have played for a draw here, but kind of slipped up at some point. Round about here, engine evaluation was still okay for White, even slightly, tiny bit favourable for White, technically. If White had played rook eg1, there shouldn't be any major cause for concern for White. He's kind of slipped up with this move, which looks very lucrative in its own right. Because does this really look like a carnivorous king here on h6? I've described this as a carnivorous king in my blitz games. It's only a carnivorous king if h4 can be knocked out. It looks lucrative to play bishop c4. I mean, let's try and have some empathy as well, because, you know, we want to get the rook to e7, right? So we just nudge the rook out of the way and we go to rook e7, we're winning. But it seems it's a way of losing instead, bishop c4, because of this. It backfired with rook a4, and it seems now Black is totally in the driving seat. He's actually gone from an equalish position technically to +2 for Black in one move. After rook a4, it's +2 for Black. So a slight slip up, which lets Fischer continue, you know, basically his series of wins, which he started from Pommes de Mallorca tournament to winning 6-0 over time, and now he's won this second game. This gives him the advantage in this game, and he's going to convert it. He's 2 pawns up after this, and yeah, it's he didn't even have to use the pawns. Basically, he gives up d6 for the a3. It's just his king is getting very, very aggressive. His rook's ideally placed on the 7th rank, and he starts to weave this mating net. So yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff. Relentless, like tactical, like pressure, etc. So I hope you got something from these 2 games this week, and we'll continue with the next 2 games hopefully next week, unless there's a major tournament maybe instead. But no, otherwise we'll carry on next week with the next 2 from this match. Okay, so have a good week. Any comments or questions, please leave them on YouTube for this video, which will be on YouTube later. Okay, thanks very much. See you next week.